The neon glow of Miller's Roadhouse buzzed against the dark sky, casting flickering shadows over the gravel parking lot, filled with battered pickup trucks and gleaming motorcycles. It was the kind of bar where people minded their business, where truckers, bikers, and blue-collar workers came to drink in peace. Inside, the place hummed with low conversations, the occasional burst of laughter, and the rhythmic clack of billiard balls. A radio in the corner played an old country tune, half drowned by the buzz of cheap beer and whiskey-fueled talk. And at a corner table, sitting alone, was John Carter, a 62-year-old retired Special Forces veteran. John was an unassuming figure, lean but strong in the way that men who have survived real battles are. His flannel shirt was old but clean, his jeans well worn, and his boots scuffed from years of use, not fashion. His ice blue eyes, sharp as a blade, scanned the room absently, not looking for trouble, but if trouble came, he'd see it before it arrived. He stirred his whiskey with slow, deliberate movements, no wasted effort, no unnecessary motion. But then, across the room, trouble found him. At the bar, Ryan Masters was holding court, and loving every second of it. The 32-year-old martial arts instructor sat with his arms draped over the back of his chair, his tight compression shirt clinging to his broad, sculpted frame. His fingerless MMA gloves were still on, as always, a statement. He wanted people to know exactly what he was, and right now, he was on a roll, drowning in beer and bravado. "Look, I'm just saying," Ryan's voice carried over the bar, loud and confident. "Some of these old guys, they love to talk about how they used to be fighters, right? But let's be real." He smirked, flexing his fingers. "They step in the ring today. They're getting folded in seconds." His gym buddies chuckled. They were young, fit, cocky, the kind of men who thought strength meant dominance, who saw life as an endless contest. Ryan leaned forward, gripping his beer. "I mean, look at that guy." He nodded toward John, who hadn't even glanced in his direction. "Bet he hasn't thrown a punch since Reagan was in office." His friends laughed, but some of the older patrons shifted uneasily. A few of them recognized John, or at least recognized the type of man he was. The bartender, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard, sighed as he poured another drink. "Kid, you don't want to do this," he muttered, shaking his head. Ryan turned, raising an eyebrow. "What? You know him?" The bartender didn't answer, just slid the glass down the bar, moving on like he'd already seen this play out 100 times. Ryan grinned wider. Perfect. A challenge. John, still at his table, hadn't moved, hadn't looked up, hadn't reacted at all. That bothered Ryan. Most people, when challenged, insulted, or even just glanced at the wrong way, reacted, even if it was subtle, even if it was just an uncomfortable shift in their seat. But this man, nothing. It was like trying to pick a fight with a statue, and Ryan couldn't stand it. He stood up. "Hey, old man," he called across the room. The bar fell silent. John kept drinking. A trucker at the pool table paused mid-shot. A biker near the jukebox turned his head slightly. Even the bartender stopped moving for a second, but John didn't react. Ryan's smirk widened. He walked forward, beer in hand, voice dripping with mockery. "You deaf or just scared?" Still, no reaction. Ryan glanced back at his friends, chuckling. "See? This is what I'm talking about. These old guys act tough, but when you call them out, nothing." A man at the bar, a former Marine, judging by his build and posture, shook his head and muttered, "Oh, kid, you don't know what you're doing." Ryan didn't hear him, or maybe he did, and chose to ignore it. He stopped at John's table. Slowly, deliberately, he set his beer down with a loud, deliberate thud. John exhaled quietly. Finally, he looked up, and for the first time, Ryan met his eyes, and something in his gut twisted. Something felt wrong. The cocky grin froze on his face for just a second, because what stared back at him wasn't fear. It wasn't irritation. It wasn't even annoyance. It was just calm. A deep, unnerving stillness. The kind you only see in men who have already survived the worst life has to offer. Men who have seen death, men who have killed. Ryan swallowed, his confidence flickering, but his ego pushed him forward. He tapped his knuckles against the table. "What's wrong, Grandpa? Afraid I'll embarrass you." John stared at him a second longer. Then he took one last sip of his whiskey, set the glass down, and finally, he spoke. "Son, If you have to tell people you're a fighter, then you're not." The bar went dead silent. Ryan's nostrils flared, his cocky grin returned, but there was something forced about it now. His hands curled into fists. The bartender sighed, rubbing a hand down his face. "Kid, you just made a mistake." But Ryan wasn't listening, and now it was too late. Ryan's smirk curled wider, but something in his eyes had shifted, a flicker of doubt, buried beneath layers of arrogance. John had barely spoken, barely moved, yet somehow he'd managed to make the air in the room feel heavier. But Ryan wasn't about to back down now. The whole bar was watching. A few people murmured quietly, exchanging knowing looks. They'd seen men like Ryan before, cocky, eager to prove themselves, always looking for an easy target. They'd also seen men like John before, but those were the ones you didn't mess with. And Ryan was about to learn why. The bartender, still drying a glass, muttered under his breath, "Christ, kid, just walk away." But Ryan, he doubled down. He grabbed his black belt from his gym bag, shook it loose, and slammed it onto John's table. The belt unfurled like a challenge, its smooth fabric standing as proof of Ryan's years of training, his titles, his wins, his ego. "You see this, old man," Ryan said, voice dripping with confidence. "This means I'm a fighter, a real one." John stared at the belt for a moment. Then he slowly lifted his gaze back to Ryan's. No words, no reaction. Just a piercing, unreadable stare. Ryan felt his chest tighten, but he covered it with a laugh, turning to his buddies. "You know what? I'll give him a shot. 10 seconds. I'll let him throw the first punch, if he even has it in him." The gym rats chuckled, nodding along, nudging each other like this was some kind of joke. But the rest of the bar? They weren't smiling anymore. A man at the pool table set down his cue, eyes narrowing. A couple of truckers pushed back from their seats, arms crossed. A biker near the jukebox muttered, "This is gonna end badly." And yet, John hadn't moved. He just reached forward, picked up the black belt, and held it for a second. Then, with zero effort, zero hesitation, he let it drop back onto the table. It landed like dead weight, like it meant nothing. Ryan's smirk faltered. John exhaled, adjusting his posture slightly. "Son," he said evenly, his voice quiet but carrying across the entire bar, "you're about to learn the difference between a fighter and a soldier." And with that, he stood up. The room held its breath as John rose to his feet. He wasn't big, wasn't imposing, but there was something about the way he moved, something about the way his shoulders rolled back into perfect alignment that made even the toughest men in the room uncomfortable. Ryan, still grinning but feeling a growing weight in his chest, took a step back without realizing it. The bartender sighed again, but this time he took a step to the side. No one was going to stop this. They knew better. "Let's take this outside," Ryan said, voice cocky but with an edge of tension now. John shook his head. "No need." Ryan frowned. "What?" John gestured to the empty floor in the middle of the bar, where a couple of tables had been cleared earlier. "Right here's fine." The bar collectively tensed. A trucker muttered, "Oh, hell?" A biker in the corner sighed and pulled out his phone. Somewhere, a chair creaked as someone leaned forward. The bartender, wiping his hands on a rag, muttered, "I hope you got health insurance, kid." Ryan rolled his neck, grinning again. He had sparred with trained fighters before. He had gone up against men twice his size, beaten them, humiliated them. This question, Mark, this was no different. "All right, old man, let's see what you got." Ryan dropped into a stance, his movements sharp, professional, fast. John, he just stood there, no stance, no fists raised, just stillness. The bar noticed. The bikers exchanged glances. The truckers inched away from the bar, making sure they had a full view of what was about to happen. Ryan smirked, bouncing lightly on his feet. "Come on, I'll give you first shot." John didn't move, didn't even blink. Ryan's smirk faltered, just a little. The bartender exhaled, rubbing a hand down his face. "Kid, don't do this." Ryan scoffed. "What, you worried about him?" He turned back to John. "All right, last chance. You want to sit back down, drink your whiskey, and pretend this never happened." John finally spoke. "Son, I gave you a chance to walk away." A flicker of irritation passed through Ryan's eyes. "All right, your loss." Ryan lunged. The bar gasped. But what happened next? It was too fast for the human eye to follow. The first move. Ryan lunged. Fast. Precise. A textbook perfect right hook aimed straight for John's jaw. It was the kind of punch that could knock a man out cold. The kind of strike Ryan had thrown 1,000 times in the ring. And yet, John wasn't there anymore. He moved. Not with speed, not in a way that looked flashy or exaggerated, but with effortless precision. A simple shift. A half step to the left. Ryan's fist cut through air. His body followed the momentum. Too much momentum. And in that split second, that fraction of a second where Ryan realized he had missed, John's hand moved. One fluid motion, not a punch, not even a strike, just a simple controlled movement as he reached out, caught Ryan's wrist, and twisted hard. Ryan's entire body followed the motion. His balance was gone. His own strength, his own force, used against him. The next thing he knew, his back slammed into the table behind him, hard. Drinks spilled, glasses shattered. Patrons jumped back, gasping as Ryan collapsed onto the wood, breath knocked from his lungs. And John? He was still standing. He hadn't even broken stance, hadn't raised a fist, hadn't attacked. He had just moved. The bar was dead silent. Then, holy shit! Star, a biker near the jukebox, let out a low whistle. A trucker at the pool table shook his head, muttering, "Damn fool never saw it coming." Ryan scrambled up, breath ragged, his face flushed with shock and confusion. He looked at John like he had just seen a ghost. He got lucky, Ryan stammered, shaking his head. He wasn't used to missing. He wasn't used to being thrown. And he definitely wasn't used to an opponent standing still while he did all the work. Ryan clenched his fists. He felt the eyes on him. The humiliation burned. "All right, old man," he spat, rolling his shoulders. "Let's see how you handle a real shot." He launched forward again. This time faster. This time angrier. A sharp roundhouse kick aimed for John's ribs. Powerful, deadly, unstoppable, or at least, that's what Ryan thought. Because John didn't block it. He didn't dodge it. He just moved slightly. Ryan's foot whiffed past air, so close that he could feel the fabric of John's flannel brush against his shin. His balance shifted, just slightly, just enough. And then, John's hand shot out. Not a punch, not an attack, just a two-finger jab, light, fast, direct, straight into Ryan's sternum. Everything stopped. Ryan's breath hitched, his legs locked up, his chest tightened, and then his body just collapsed. Like a switch had been flipped, his limbs gave out beneath him, and he hit the floor, hard. For a moment, the bar was silent. No one moved. No one spoke. Then, from somewhere in the back, what the actual FAK just happened? Star laughter. Not cruel laughter, disbelieving laughter. A man at the bar, still holding his drink, muttered, Did he just shut him down with a damn poke?" A biker near the jukebox chuckled, shaking his head. Ryan was still on the ground, blinking up at the ceiling, trying to figure out why his body wasn't listening to him anymore. He gasped, trying to sit up, but his chest wouldn't cooperate. His nerves were still catching up to what had happened. John adjusted his flannel, sat back down, took another sip of his whiskey. And just like that, it was like nothing had happened. Ryan finally managed to sit up, chest still heaving, face burning with humiliation. His friends wouldn't even look at him. The bartender just let out a slow, knowing sigh. "Told you, kid." Ryan stared at John, his mind racing. This guy wasn't a fighter, he was something else. You didn't even hit me," Ryan finally managed, voice shaking. John glanced at him. "Didn't have to." Ryan sat on the floor, gasping, chest heaving, limbs still refusing to cooperate. His face burned, not just from the fall, but from the weight of every pair of eyes locked onto him. The entire bar had witnessed it. A man who had built his whole life around being a fighter had just been neutralized by a man who never even raised his fists. No spinning kicks, no flashy moves, just pure, precise efficiency. And Ryan couldn't understand what had just happened. He blinked up at the ceiling, his mind racing, his ego shattered. I don't understand," he muttered, shaking his head, trying to push himself upright. John, still seated, still calm, watched him with a quiet patience that made Ryan's stomach turn. "You relied too much on strength," John said, picking up his whiskey again. "That's your first mistake." Ryan finally managed to stand, legs unsteady, hands trembling. His mouth opened, ready to say something, anything to salvage the moment. But before he could, the first laugh cut through the silence. A biker near the jukebox, low, deep, almost disbelieving. Then another chuckle, then more. Within seconds, the whole bar erupted. Some were laughing, some were shaking their heads, murmuring to each other in awe. A trucker leaned against the pool table, smirking. Man just turned off like a broken switch. Ryan's stomach dropped. His eyes darted to his friends, but they weren't looking at him. They were looking at John. And they weren't mocking him anymore. They were afraid of him. Ryan felt the humiliation flood his chest, his breath coming too fast. He needed to regain control. That wasn't a real fight," he blurted, his voice louder than he intended. The laughter slowed. John raised an eyebrow, but he didn't say anything. He didn't have to, because the bartender spoke first. "Oh?" Looked like a fight to me. Ryan's jaw clenched. I wasn't ready," he snapped. "He caught me off guard." Someone near the bar chuckled. "Buddy, that's the definition of losing a fight." Ryan spun on his heel, glaring at the man. But before he could say anything, he saw it. A phone screen. A biker in the corner was holding up his phone, the screen still recording. His heart dropped. Then another phone screen lit up nearby, and another, and another. And that's when the reality truly set in. "Oh man, this is gonna go viral." Someone whispered it, but the weight of the words slammed into Ryan like a second knockout. His hands clenched, his mouth opened. But what was he supposed to say? What could he say? No one was going to forget this. Not tomorrow, not next week, not ever. The video would hit the internet before he even got back to his car. And just like that, Ryan Masters, the cocky martial artist, the undefeated gym champion, the man who lived for the spotlight, had just become a meme, a joke, a lesson in humility for millions to watch. Ryan snapped. "Delete that video!" he barked, storming toward the man recording. But before he could even get close, a single sound stopped him cold, a chair scraping back. Slow, deliberate, unrushed. Ryan froze. John was standing again, and for the first time in his life, Ryan felt something he hadn't felt in years. Something primal, something cold. Fear. The veteran didn't say a word, didn't raise his fists, didn't even take a full step forward. He just stood there, his ice blue eyes locked onto Ryan's. And Ryan, for the first time that night, truly saw him. Not an old man, not a washed-up fighter, not even an opponent. Just a warrior, a man who had seen real fights, real pain, real loss. And Ryan was nothing in comparison. His mouth opened, then closed, his hands twitched, then fell to his sides. He turned and walked out of the bar, to laughter, to whispers, to the sound of phones uploading the footage in real time. The video was everywhere within hours. Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter. The comments came fast. "This is what happens when you mess with the wrong old man. Dude really thought he was in an anime, got folded by 2 fingers. This needs to be a movie." And the hashtags, respect veterans, old demon strength, MMA humbled, instant karma. Millions watched, millions laughed, millions learned a lesson without ever stepping foot in that bar. And Ryan disappeared from social media for a while. But John, he just went back to drinking his whiskey because for him, it was just another night. Ryan didn't go back to the gym the next day, or the day after that, or the day after that. For 2 full weeks, he avoided public places, ignored calls, and stayed off social media. But that didn't stop the video from spreading like wildfire. At first, he thought it would die down, that the internet would move on. They didn't. Memes, reaction videos, even news segments started popping up. Martial artist gets humbled by elderly veteran in bar. Fighter challenges wrong opponent, regrets it instantly. Special Forces veteran shuts down arrogant black belt with 2 fingers. Everywhere he went, he saw his own face frozen in humiliation, on a floor he barely remembered falling onto. People in the comments sections weren't just laughing, They were analyzing. This is what happens when you don't respect your elders. Bet this guy thought he was in an action movie, ended up in a cautionary tale. Can we talk about how the veteran never even fought back? He just let the kid destroy himself. Ryan stopped reading after that. But no matter how much he tried to escape the shame, the lesson stayed with him. Because deep down, he knew they were right. 2 weeks later, Ryan finally forced himself back into his gym, expecting to find mockery, laughter, maybe even students who had lost respect for him. Instead, he found something worse. They weren't making fun of him, they were ignoring him. He was no longer the leader of the pack. No one looked at him the same way. And when he stepped into the training room, his best student, someone he had personally coached for years, was standing in his usual spot, instructing a group of fighters. Ryan hesitated. "Hey, what are you doing?" The student turned, shrugged. "Well, you kinda disappeared, so figured someone had to take over." That hit hard. Ryan clenched his jaw, nodding stiffly. "Yeah, makes sense." He left the gym without throwing a single punch. And for the first time in his life, he felt completely lost. Ryan spent the next few days thinking, not just about the fight, not just about his humiliation, but about John, that calm, that stillness, the complete control, the way he had never felt the need to prove anything. Ryan had spent his whole life fighting, chasing validation, proving his strength, making sure the world knew his name. And in the span of a few seconds, a man with nothing to prove had taken everything from him without even trying. That's when Ryan realized he didn't lose to John in that bar. He lost to himself. So, one evening after way too much time spent staring at his own reflection, Ryan finally made a decision. He grabbed his jacket and he drove back to Miller's Roadhouse. The neon sign buzzed against the night sky as Ryan stepped out of his car, staring at the familiar sight of the dive bar that had ruined his life. A deep breath. Then he pushed the door open. The second he stepped inside, the conversations quieted. Not fully, not dramatically, but just enough for him to notice. A few bikers looked up from their drinks. A trucker smirked. Someone nudged their buddy and whispered something Ryan didn't quite catch. He ignored them, because his eyes were on one person, John. Sitting at the same table, whiskey in hand, completely unbothered by the world around him. Ryan's stomach tightened. But this time, he didn't storm over. He didn't slam anything onto the table. He walked, slowly, respectfully. John barely glanced up as Ryan stopped in front of him. The veteran took another sip of his whiskey. Then, finally, he spoke. "Figured you'd show up eventually." Ryan swallowed. "Yeah?" A long pause. John set his glass down, looking up at Ryan with that same unreadable stare. "So, what now?" Ryan exhaled. Then, before he could lose his nerve, before his pride could get in the way again, he bowed, a full, respectful bow. When he straightened, he met John's eyes. "Teach me." The bar was silent again. John studied Ryan for a moment. Then, for the first time since they met, he actually smiled. Not big, not dramatic. Just a small, knowing smirk. He gestured at the chair across from him. "Sit down, kid. Let's talk." Ryan did. And that night, he didn't try to prove anything. He didn't try to show off. He just listened. Because for the first time in his life, he was ready to learn. The next morning, a new video hit the internet. Not one of Ryan being humiliated. Not one of him losing, but one of him training. With John. The caption, "The best fighters know when to put their ego aside and listen." The comments poured in. Damn, this guy really turned it around. Humility is the real mark of a champion. This is the character arc I needed to see. The memes disappeared, the ridicule faded, and for the first time in his life, Ryan Masters wasn't just a fighter. He was a student, and John Carter, he was exactly what he had always been. A soldier, a survivor, a man with nothing to prove, and the one person Ryan would never forget. Please subscribe and like the video. Thank you, love you.